Welcome to Little Known Black History Facts. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. George Washington Johnson, the first ever recorded artist. George Washington Johnson is believed to be the first black vocalist to make a commercial recording, with confirmed cylinders having been recorded in early 1890 for several licensees of the North American Phonograph Company. Promotional material from the Edison Company indicated that he may also have recorded on temporary tinfoil drums as early as 1877 for exhibition purposes. In an era when master recordings were technically impractical, he made hundreds of recordings in the 1890s of his two hits, The Whistling Coon and The Laughing Song, with the latter being one of the best-selling songs of the decade, selling upwards of 50,000 copies. So successful were these two songs that he recorded no other tunes under his own name until 1897, and he would never again match the success of his early songs, which often netted him as much as $100 a week in recording wages, in an era when the average American worker made only $500 a year. The phonograph, or talking machine, had been invented by Thomas Edison only a few years before Johnson tracked a rendition of The Whistling Coon. That recording helped give birth to what we now know as the record industry. At the time, there was no electronic amplification of a singer's voice. Artists all but shouted into a cone-shaped device, and the sound waves were moved by a needle etching a rotating drum of hard wax. George Washington Johnson is one of the most fascinating unsung heroes in recording history. Possibly the first African American to record, and certainly the first to become widely successful as a recording artist in the 1890s, he has been virtually ignored in the history books, in part because of embarrassment about the songs he sang. The first successful black recording artist was, after all, billed as the Whistling Coon, coon being a derogatory term for blacks. He showed that it was possible for a black man to sell a lot of records to white America, opening doors for those who would come later with less offensive material. He was very well liked in the industry, a friendly, hard-working older man. Johnson built a substantial career in the young industry while making many friends among white artists and phonograph entrepreneurs. Sometime during the 1870s, Johnson had come north to New York City to try to carve out a new life. He had become an expert whistler and also had a talent for laughing songs, odd little ditties in which he laughed in time with the music. With his broad smile, hearty laugh, and willingness to mock himself, white audiences found him quite appealing. He slowly developed a small-scale musical career in New York while living in slums of Manhattan's West Side. Upper-class whites sometimes hired him for entertainment. He may have led a brief stint touring with a minstrel group known as the Georgia Minstrels. Most of his time was spent hustling on the streets of New York and other public places, singing and whistling for coins. Johnson became a familiar New York street character. Evidence shows that he may have been recruited to make tinfoil recordings when Thomas Edison's newly invented phonograph was first exhibited to the public in 1878 and 1879. By 1890, Johnson was in his 40s and just scraping by, picking up odd jobs and singing on the streets of New York when his life was changed forever. Edison invited him into his laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey to record there, and other companies began pursuing him as well. The phonograph had finally been improved to the point that it could now be commercially exploited. Young entrepreneurs began to set up local dealerships to market it. Since the public saw it as an entertainment device, they soon began looking for cheap talent to make musical cylinders. There was no way to make duplicates of a wax cylinder, so the singer had to perform the same song over and over again to build up enough stock to sell. Also, the sound was still not very clear, and recording required someone with a very strong voice and clear articulation. George Johnson, who sang and whistled on the streets of New York, was available, cheap, and willing to work all afternoon. He had a strong pair of lungs, and his whistling and laughter was as hearty at the end of the day as it had been at the beginning. Just what the entrepreneurs needed. Moreover, he had two specialties that made listeners, at least white listeners, laugh. One was The Whistling Coon, a comic minstrel song written a decade earlier in which he whistled in time with the music. and the other, The Laughing Song, in which he laughed along with the melody. Both made fun of blacks, and the sight of a jovial black man indulging in self-mockery was, to many, highly entertaining. They were immediate hits. At the time, cylinders were sold not to individuals but mainly to exhibitors who took the still expensive Edison phonograph on the road and demonstrated it in halls and town squares across the country. They also set up phonograph parlors with automatic machines, a kind of early jukebox. People listened through acoustical ear tubes rather than through an open horn, paying a small fee for the experience. This is how most Americans were introduced to the phonograph. Everyone wanted to hear the jovial records by the black man. The exhibitors kept wearing out copies and ordering more. Johnson was brought back into the studio again and again to produce more copies. Although he didn't get royalties, he was paid by the session and began to make a very nice sum of money from this sideline. Johnson became widely known as the records were shipped across the country and even overseas. Remarkably, as years passed, the records kept selling, becoming standards rather than transitory hits. By the late 1890s, they were said to have sold over 50,000 copies, a phenomenal total considering the labor involved in producing that many and the still small scale of the industry. They are believed to be the best-selling records of the entire decade of the 1890s. In 1899, George Johnson was accused of murder of a woman that was living with him. Johnson was arrested and charged with the murder. Several friends, black and white, rallied to his side. Numerous character witnesses came forward to testify. The prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial and was a shambles. Finally, after many objections and motions for dismissal by Johnson's attorneys, the DA abandoned the case. Johnson never took the stand. He emerged on the steps of the courtroom to a cheering crowd. Johnson resumed his career without difficulty, but there was change looming on the horizon. All through the 1890s, record companies had been working on ways to make duplicate copies. By 1902, both disc and cylinder makers had developed methods to mass-produce copies from original single master recordings. Johnson was recording his few specialties for all the major companies by this time, plus for many minor companies. As soon as each of them had secured a suitable mass recording for him, they didn't need him anymore, and his income dropped precipitously. In addition, white artists began to successfully cover his recordings, especially the whistling numbers. Eventually, he had to go to work as a doorman, but he was drinking too heavily and had to be discharged from that job. His last recordings, remakes of his old hits, appear to have been made in 1910. Now in his mid-60s, he moved to a small tenement room in Harlem where he died, forgotten and alone, on January 23, 1914, at the age of 67. His records went out of print, and he was pretty much forgotten for many years after that.
As I was coming around the corner, I heard some people say, "Here comes the dandy doctor, here he comes this way. His heel is like a snowplow, his mouth is like a trap, and when he opens it gently, you will see a fearful gap in the dialect." I got Daddy Hill from laughing.
Until next time, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.